Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is I, yes. It's me, Brennon, here again with yet another episode of the Two Deep Coverage Podcast. For those who aren't familiar, because I had somebody ask me, how do you pronounce your name? It's Brennon, Brennon, Brennon. Start incorporating that in so people aren't so confused. Brennon, here with an episode of Two Deep Coverage. I've made it to episode 4. I'm very proud of myself because I've made it to episode 4. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to make content about a sport that I really love, football, particularly professional football, whether it's spring football, which some consider the minor league. I'm not going to disrespect them because they're still getting paid. Or the NFL, the big boys, who've been in existence for over 100 years. Football is football to me. I like college football too. It's a little overwhelming at times just because there's so many schools, multiple divisions, and it's difficult to keep up to the extent that I would really like to. It's a lot easier with the NFL or the UFL to account for 32 teams or 8 teams or what have you, and a limited number of games. I can have a better scope of the entirety of those leagues. So, I don't know, it just makes it a little more entertaining and fun for me to have familiarity with more people. College, you're getting guys, I mean, you see it in the NFL draft every year. You get a guy coming from Eastern Michigan and Max Crosby, or from Buffalo like Khalil Mack, or South Alabama, or this JUCO, or you know what I mean? It's just so many different schools out there, and I don't know. It's just different to me. A lot of my friends prefer college, and particularly now with the new NCAA game coming out after over a decade of being on hiatus, giving these kids an opportunity to take advantage of their NIL eligibility, name, image, and likeness. And from all accounts, I've heard the game is fire. I haven't played it. I haven't really been a gamer in recent years. I do want to get on the PS5 and catch back up and get back into the swing of things with NCAA and Madden. But got some other things that I'm trying to accomplish. So that's where my focus lies. But football is football, like I said, and I'm grateful to be able to talk about it. If you're grateful and appreciative of what I'm doing with this content, be sure to give me a like, a comment, a share, and if you see fit to do, go ahead and subscribe so you can keep up with all the notifications. I am going to keep stacking, keep adding to the content, keep getting better, keep taking notes. Listen, I watch film on me. I look back at these episodes and I say, okay, what could I do better? What am I not doing with my hands? What am I doing with my voice? What am I doing? Am I touching my face too much? You know, is my voice loud enough? Is it too quiet? Is it too quiet? You know, am I addressing camera 2? Camera 2 does not get as much love as it should, but I'm going to do my best to give camera 2 the love that it deserves because it is worthy. You get what I'm saying? So I do watch film on myself as well to get better. If you have any suggestions, if you have any comments, and if you have any ideas or concerns, anything, any feedback that you want to offer, you can send that to me at 2deepcoverage@gmail.com. That's the number 2, deepcoverage@gmail.com. Again, slower part of the off season, even though training camp is officially ramped up, full pads, they're going full go at these practices. Joint practices have already commenced. Guys are already getting sauced up in one-on-ones, mossed and all that. Also getting a fair number of injuries, which is par for the course, unfortunately, every off season. But it's not too much for me to touch on just yet. We did have one preseason game, so football is officially back. Officially, even though it's not the regular season. A game was played or attempted to be played. It was rained out, so I'll touch on that. And also just going to run down some of the other events that have happened in the past week. The biggest thing I'm going to talk about which if you're not interested in this, it's fair enough. Go ahead and skip this episode. But it's going to be about my transition from fanhood throughout the years as a child to an adult to eventually landing with and sticking with the team that I'm going to die a fan of, which is the Las Vegas Raiders. So I'll touch on that on the back half of this episode. Some of the updates from training camp. Still got a fair number of guys holding out. Trent Williams should be the highest paid left tackle in football. Let me check to see if he is. I believe he is. But if he's not, the fact that this deal isn't done yet is ridiculous. He is not. Total cash, he's number 4. I'm not sure who Mike Onwenu is. Onwenu. I've heard of Jordan Mailata. Joe Alt. Now this is surprising to me. And I haven't done as much studying on the wage scale, particularly for rookies in the league. So this one kind of threw me off. Joe Alt has the 3rd most total dollars on his contract of any tackle in the NFL. For those who are unfamiliar, Joe Alt is a rookie tackle for the Los Angeles Chargers. He just got drafted in April. And he's already the 3rd highest paid tackle in the NFL. I thought those years were over with when contracts used to be out of control and rookies were coming in making more than some established veterans who had proven some things in the league, and they started to set a cap on the rookie wages. But maybe it was just for skill guys, quarterbacks, receivers, running backs. Because Joe Alt is making more money total than Trent Williams. Now let me see how that's broken down over years, because that can make a difference. If that's over the course of 4 years and Trent Williams is getting it in 2 years, then that makes a little more sense. Okay. Trent Williams has 1 year left on his deal. It looks like, well, no, it's a 6-year deal from 2021 through 2026. So that's something I'm going to have to educate myself a little bit more on. Meanwhile, Joe Alt has a 4-year deal from 2024 to 2028. So yeah, that's where it is. So Joe Alt is averaging about $5 million a year to get to that $20 million over the course of 4 years. Trent Williams is getting $20 million this year, base salary. So I take that back. Total cash probably isn't the best determinant in that regard. So let's look at average. There we go. Those are names I recognize. Tristan Wirfs is number 1. Penei Sewell, Christian Darrisaw, Laramie Tunzel, Andrew Thomas. Okay. Trent Williams is 6 on this list. He's not in the top 5, which still, as what many consider a long time best tackle in the NFL, this isn't right. And that's no shade or no disrespect to these other guys, because these are the premier tackles in the league. Penei Sewell is the top right tackle. Everybody else is playing on the blind side. But Trent Williams is the top dog. He has been. He continues to be. He set the example. He's kind of changed the mold of that position from just being a big guy that can drop back and protect the blind side to, no, I'm an athlete. I can get out on the edge, pull out. Pause. He can pull around and catch a corner or a safety slip-in or outside backer, set the edge. He can do a lot of different things as an athlete that plays left tackle, as opposed to just a drop-back pass protector. And I think a lot of these newer offensive linemen that followed suit, they've become more athletic. GMs have gotten more accustomed to looking for those guys that can be a little bit more flexible in what they offer to the offensive line. So he needs to get that top contract. And he's holding out until he gets that. We've still got Brennon Ayuk holding in. He is in the building but not participating in any practices. I'm curious to see where he would land on this list, just looking at average salary. Justin Jefferson's number 1. I don't think there's an argument that can be made there for Ayuk. A.J. Brown, nope. Amon-Ra, production-wise, Amon-Ra still got him. Just being objective. Tyreek Hill, nope. Jalen Waddle. So if we're going to talk about just where Ayuk should land, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Adams, DJ Moore, there's an argument that can be made that Brandon Ayuk should have a top 5 average per year salary. That argument can be made. Because I'm not seeing any other names as I scroll down this list that are just like head and shoulders above Ayuk talent-wise. The issue for Ayuk has been and it'll continue to be his usage. He's doing a lot with a little in terms of his targets and the attention he gets. He's getting all of his opportunities spread thin between CMC in the backfield. You got Debo on the other side or moving around the formation. You got George Kittle, and they just drafted a rookie in Ricky Pearsall, which gives some indication that the 49ers may be prepared to move on from Ayuk if necessary. Not that they want to, but they're preparing themselves. And that could work against them. But he's in the building. We'll see how that works out. CeeDee Lamb, same deal, except his production very much puts him in that top 4 category, especially last year. He just went crazy last year. That extra game definitely helped out, but the connection he has with Dak, the responsibility he has with that wide receiver room not being that great, still being able to produce, knowing that he's going to be that number one guy, number one focus for all of the defenses, finding different ways to get him the ball on jet sweeps and screens and also working the route tree down the field. He's definitely earned his way into that top 4 conversation contractually. Now, is he actually a better receiver than Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, A.J. Brown? Argument could be made. I don't personally think so. But his production suggests, yeah, I need to be paid like those guys, for sure. Especially if you're going to let Dak go. And speaking of Dak, he's also looking for a new deal as well, but he's in camp. CD's holding out. The whole conversation about the Cowboys, which I try not to talk too much about them, they're getting plenty of airtime from plenty of other outlets, but they do have a pickle between Dak, paying Dak, CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons all coming up in the next year. So they should be trying to get something done with at least one of those guys soon, like before the season starts. But we know Jerry Jones' history. He does like to take care of his hometown guys that he drafted, but he's in a pickle, especially if he's trying to win now. He's had those guys on the roster. He hasn't seen it yield the success that he's looking for, even the NFC Championship game berth. They really can't get out the second round for whatever reason. And some tough decisions are going to have to be made, especially as he's given a little bit more power and leeway to Steven, his son, to make some of those roster decisions for him on his behalf, like to try to give him some good, fresh perspective and wisdom on the best approach. It's going to be tough to hang on to all 3 of those guys and still have a solid competitive roster for years to come. It's just going to be tough, especially if you're paying all of them top of the market money. I just got a funny feeling Dak is going to end up being the casualty, and he's going to end up being the one to test the market or get traded. Raiders, I wouldn't be so mad about that. I used to be on the fence, like, I don't know if we want Dak. I don't know if he's the best fit for that roster, but just listening to him speak in recent months and years, how he's starting to get a little bit more calloused and hardened from this process and this yo-yoing back and forth between, oh, do you want me or do you want me not? He's starting to get a little bit of an edge to him. If you listen to some of his newer press conferences, he's developing a little bit more of an edge, not necessarily towards the media, but just towards the process and towards things in general related to the contractual side of the game. And that edge could work in our favor. If the Aiden O'Connell doesn't pan out, Gardner Minshew doesn't elevate beyond mediocrity, Dak could definitely do a lot of things with that roster. And I think belief As I mentioned in the previous episode, belief will make a huge difference in his performance and his motivation. So come on to the Raiders. If they let you go, you know, we'll be interested, unless Aiden O'Connell turns into Tom Brady 2.0. So we got some guys holding out, some guys holding in, some guys asking for a deal that are practicing. Haven't heard anything on the T. Higgins front either. I don't know what's going on with that. This was a very nerve-wracking development in the Raiders camp. Trey Taylor, who I believe won the Jim Thorpe Award at Air Force, top defensive back in the country his senior year. We got a good leader, good young winner, award-winning player in, I think it was round 7 of the draft. It was later in the draft, but we got him. You know, top defensive guy in the country, production-wise. That means something. We get him to camp, and he decides, I don't know if he decided this or if he was put up to this by some of the vets, which that's even worse, because as a veteran, you should know better than to put your rookie in that kind of position. But nevertheless, he was the one that was caught on camera with a Patrick Mahomes Muppet. And there are guys in the background. I don't know who's who and who ultimately recorded this and how it got out. I don't know. It was a lot of different steps that had to take place for this mug to go viral, but it ended up going viral. And I'm just watching it again. So it's Trey Taylor making fun. Well, he's not even moving his mouth. He's just laughing, smiling, but he's putting a puppet on his hand. And there are guys in the background mimicking, you know, Patrick Mahomes' unique voice, the raspy Muppet sounding voice, objectively. You know, I don't have anything against Patrick Mahomes, but he does play for the enemy. And at the end of the video or near the end of the clip, somebody says, I'm a B, basically saying Patrick Mahomes, I'm a B. Like, it just went a little far, even for camp. Not far in the sense of like, oh, it was disrespectful or he can't handle it, or, you know, as a competitor, as somebody who's been in the locker room, I don't think it was anything malicious or, you know, like yo mama. It wasn't anything like that. However, why? You know, you got the best of Mahomes in the Christmas game. You competitive in the division. I think finished second in the division, maybe first in the division record-wise, just inter-division record. You're building. You're getting some fresh energy. You got Antonio Pierce at the helm. Why do this? Why poke the bear? As a Raiders fan, I don't get it. I don't understand it. And if you're going to do it, put the cameras away. Why is the camera out? And this is on the field. This is like after practice on the field. Why is the camera even there? And then the next step is, why is it posted? And who posted it? How did it get out? It was just so many different things, so many questions I had. I'm watching the Cam Newton reaction video, and his reaction was hilarious because he was like, well, who are you? Talking about Trey Taylor. Relatively speaking, Trey can have all his collegiate accomplishments, but he's a rookie, nothing proven in the league, and he's not even close to Patrick Mahomes' level. Even though Patrick Mahomes was rated number 4, apparently, on the top 100 list, that's insane. Speaking of, top 100 came out, and Tyreek Hill was ranked number 1. I want to touch on this a little bit more. I'll probably do a deeper dive next week when I get a little bit more freedom and opportunity to find out who was where, who is what. But Tyreek was number 1, first receiver to be in the top spot on the top 100. And this is kind of what I'm going to dive into next week. I think a lot of people who have voting power on these lists, these top lists, top 5, top 10, whatever, they're becoming heavily influenced by fantasy football. And that's as a fantasy football player and commissioner of 4 leagues. Getting very, very influenced by fantasy production in determining who top players are. You're taking out offensive linemen. You're taking out tight ends and running backs. You're taking out very productive and crucial players. You're not even giving them the credit they deserve. And you're giving a lot of credit to stats and flash and production. I'm not taking away from the importance of the wide receiver position. I played wide receiver. However, as much as I love Tyreek, last year, and even Lamar Jackson, I'll say that too, the MVP. And maybe it's just like this in any sport league. We know who the best player in the league was. Again, objectively, I am a Raiders fan. We know who the best player in the league was last season. The best football player. It wasn't Tyreek Hill. He's probably the most talented in terms of his production, but best is measured by what? So I'll touch on that a little bit more next week. I mentioned the Hall of Fame game. Hall of Fame game was between the Houston Texans and the Chicago Bears. Ended up getting rained out in the third quarter, which it feels like that's happened multiple times in recent years. I might be mistaken. I get so hyped for the game because I've been lacking football so much. And then when the game comes, it inevitably lets me down. I didn't get to watch the first half just yet because why? Caleb Williams didn't play. Keenan Allen didn't play. Montez Sweat didn't play. C.J. Stroud didn't play. I'm sure Stephon Diggs didn't play. Enough of the starters didn't play to where I needed to rush home from what I was doing to catch the first half. I caught part of the third quarter before it got rained out, but it just wasn't a very attractive game with all of those starters missing. So I think they really need to work on either the timing or the format, not the format, but the timing of the game. Maybe the Hall of Fame game shouldn't be an isolated game in a weekend by itself with a Hall of Fame ceremony. Or maybe the Hall of Fame game should be later in the preseason. If you're going to, even if you have it stand alone, maybe it should be the last game of the preseason or the third week of the preseason. Traditionally, when the preseason was 4 weeks, week 3 was the most competitive week. That was kind of the ramp up where the starters got more playing time, and then week 4 they would rest before the actual season started. Now it's only a 3-week preseason. Maybe the Hall of Fame game could be that week 4 matchup. I don't know. And it's got to be something different because at this point, unless you're really, really thirsty for football, you're not giving this game that much attention knowing the starters aren't going to play. And if they do play, it's not significant. The number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft didn't play a snap. The first game that took place while he was a part of an NFL franchise, he didn't play in. It's just like, well, why am I watching it? And, that's just me. We'll see what they do with that. And I'll be curious to see like how the ratings have ebbed and flowed over the past few years with the Hall of Fame game. I am interested to see the induction or the enshrinement ceremony, though. A lot of those players were guys I grew up watching or came of age watching, so I'm familiar with all of their names. Only one I would say I didn't really see was, well, obviously Randy Grandishar, but also Steve Mongo McMichael. I was just familiar with him from the wrestling days. So it's good to see that he got in. I didn't know he was that good of a player, but gives me some more research to do. That's one thing about the game, especially the history of the game and how old the game is, how old the NFL is. There's always some opportunity to learn something new about the history, something that you didn't know or some angle that you didn't see. So that's something else I look forward to with this project. Couple of other updates with injuries. I mentioned ACLs just yesterday. I'm recording this Saturday. July. Oh, nope. We are in August, baby. August 3rd. Shout out to my brother. Happy birthday, bro. Today is my brother's birthday. I need to give him a call. August 3rd, 2024. I am in the bar branch of St. Louis Public Library, Camera 2. I'm going to give you more love, I promise. I'm going to do my best. B.J. Ojulari yesterday tore his ACL, unfortunately, for the Arizona Cardinals. 22-year-old, young potential in a defensive scheme with Jonathan Gannon that's supposed to be very promising. Unfortunately, he ended up tearing his ACL Friday afternoon in practice. They're going back to Dennis Gardeck, I believe, at that outside backer position. But very unfortunate. We also had Deontay Foreman, ended up getting airlifted to the hospital. A running back that I thought had a lot of promise coming into the league. Never really got his full solo opportunity to shine. It's always been as a spellback or backup. But in the limited opportunities that he has had, he's shown why he was highly rated. He ended up getting airlifted to the hospital earlier in the week with a head injury. Apparently it messed with his neck and potentially his spine. He was lacking movement until he had gotten on the plane. I'm not sure about all the details, but eventually he did regain consciousness and movement, and he's back at practice now with the team. I'm hoping he's not practicing, but he's with the team at least, so he seems to be doing okay. Those injuries are always interesting when you can't necessarily define what the injury is or what the issue was at the time, and then all of a sudden those players are back with the team in short order. It's kind of scary because you're still human. It's like, okay, what lingering effects do you actually have? What was affected that may be something of note to pay attention to in the future? Like, do you have limitations because of what you experienced? None of that ever comes out. I remember when Elijah Moore, whether it was last season or 2 years ago, it was one of these past 2 years, playing with the Jets, or it was either the Jets or I don't know if he was with the Browns yet. He was with the Browns. And he had a scary hit on the sidelines, and on camera, you can see his hands moving involuntarily. Not just like the Tua situation where Tua was throwing up West Side, but like his wrists, his arms, everything's moving very rapidly and very erratically. And for me, maybe it's just me, I'm like, that man's having a seizure on the field. That looks like a seizure. But Elijah Moore was back with the team in like 2 weeks. And it was very quiet. There was no real reporting on it after that. They got him stabilized, got him to the hospital, whatever. And like 2 weeks later, they were like, oh, he was a concussion, but he's cleared. And I'm like, no, that didn't look like no regular concussion. That looked like something, that didn't look right. Just put it like that. Whatever it was, because I don't know what it was. They didn't say what it was. It didn't look right. But he ended up getting back with the team. And I've seen that with Stafford. Stafford had a big hit one game since he's been with the Rams. Hit his head. He was clearly concussed. You could, if you look at the angle and you look at his eyes were in outer space. And he ended up finishing that game. I've seen it a couple of different times, but I know how the NFL is with injuries and with player safety. It's very, very shaky, to say the least. And I think it's just business in general. Guys are going to do what they can to cover their butts so that money keeps flowing and that their cash cows keep staying on the field, which is unfortunate. But best wishes to Deontay Foreman and any other player who's had any kind of head trauma or head injury. I'm glad that they do have the gladiator caps now in practice for added protection. Unnecessary hits to the head or the helmet are beneficial. I thought somebody was trying to break in here. But I'm grateful that they're at least lie to me. Give me the impression that you care about my safety. That's appreciated. So, shouts out to him. DeAndre Hopkins Oh, they're next door. I'm like, what is that noise? I am at the public library, so I just got to be alert and be ready for whatever. But DeAndre Hopkins, one of my favorite receivers ever, starting to get up there in age, and it's reflected in the increasing injury rate. Unfortunately, he is out for 4 to 6 weeks with a knee injury. Again, one of those undisclosed injuries. We don't know what it is. We don't know if it's ACL, MCL, PCL, sprain, slight tear. We don't know what it is. We just know it's an injury, and he's out for 4 to 6. No surgery is necessary, which is a good sign, but it's an injury nonetheless. And let me move this right. There we go. Boom. Oh yeah, sexy. It's very unfortunate because the Titans, their offseason development showed a lot of promise. I was high on the Titans. I felt like they made a lot of moves that I was a fan of. I was curious to see what Will Levis was going to do with this new talent. And D-Hop is out. Now, the season hasn't started. He could still be back before week 1. Still a strong possibility if he's on the lower end of that timetable, the 4 weeks. But that's not the way you want to start. You want to start as fresh as possible, as solid as possible. That's still time you're missing. Chemistry you're not getting to develop. Treylon Burks is going to be the number 2 receiver now, which, well, maybe not. Still possible that Tyler Boyd takes that number 2 spot because Tyler Boyd is a very solid, productive receiver with the Bengals, and he's been looking for that starting opportunity. This might be it for him. But Treylon Burks still has a chance to earn it. He got drafted high for a reason. They traded A.J. Brown away for him, and they still have him on the roster. So he has an opportunity to earn the number 2 spot. Either way, unfortunate development for D-Hop. Once those injuries start piling up, man, it's just not a good sign. And finally, Justin Herbert. He's out 2 to 3 weeks with plantar fasciitis. I don't know if any procedures are necessary for that, but saw a clip of him on NFL Network scrambling. Not scrambling, no, it was a designed run up the middle of the field. And I was just like, this is not Colin Kaepernick, Mr. Harbaugh. Let's not try to make him into Alex Smith. Justin Herbert is one of the best throwers of the football in the NFL. Let him throw the football. Anything other than that is criminal. And if this is any indication, you need to allow him to be a pocket passer, and if you're going to run the ball, you've got the running backs to run the ball. Come up with the creative ways to do it as you've done in the past, whether it was Frank Gore or whoever you had at Stanford. I can't remember his name. I know Andrew Luck was there. Who played at Stanford with Andrew Luck? What running back? Was it CMC? No, CMC came later. But nevertheless, hey, unless you're just not that committed to Justin Herbert and you don't really care what happens to him, which that would be unfortunate, your goal is to keep him upright and keep him healthy on the field. Don't be running him unnecessarily. Apparently his body just can't take it. All right, he'll be back before the first week of the regular season, but that's a warning sign. That's a red flag from Mr. Harbaugh. Do not mess up your franchise quarterback year 1. You're basically just going to tank this whole season. And maybe that's part of the plan too, so he can get more talent. I don't know. I don't really care, again, Raiders fan. But let me talk and transition here to something near and dear to my heart. How I became a fan of the Chargers' nemesis, the Las Vegas Raiders. So, if you're curious to read up on this, this story of my fanhood journey, I actually have a blog that I haven't contributed anything to in the past 5 years. But it's on WordPress, and I'll put the link in the bio beneath the video, where I documented my transition from the team that used to be here in St. Louis. They shall not be named this episode. I gave them plenty of pub in previous episodes. But as they transitioned back to Los Angeles, and the manner in which they did it, it wasn't that they left, it was how they left, how the owner went scorched earth and talked bad about my city and decided to slander us and just trash us on the way out the door. It's like, nah, I can't root for that team. Sorry. And they're going to a city that, honestly, I've never been a fan of. I'm not a fan of Los Angeles. Never have been. Actually had an opportunity to live there recently, and maybe that'll come up in future episodes, more details about that. But my time there pretty much reinforced why I didn't like the city. It's like, yeah, this is exactly what I thought it was going to be. So I ended up transitioning out of fanhood of that team, and I became a free agent, a fan free agent. And so I documented that journey on WordPress. I did a blog style, March Madness style blog, because it was March of 2016. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to put all of the NFL teams in a bracket. Instead of 64, it's going to be 32 teams. And I'm going to go round by round, eliminating teams based on certain criteria. So what was the criteria that I had here? It's towards the bottom. I said I ranked teams based on their current success, their historical success, and projected success. What kind of culture they've built, what their branding is like, the uniforms. You know, the uniforms matter. You know, what's the front office looking like, and, you know, how attractive their branding is. You know, I'm projecting into the future, but I'm also acknowledging and observing the past to identify what team I want to affiliate myself with for the foreseeable future, all the way till I die. I don't want to change teams anymore, all right? I'm a Washington Wizards fan, which that's enough suffering, okay? I became a fan of them when they were the Bullets, and then as soon as I hopped on that bandwagon, I think that was 98, 99, oh yeah, let's change our branding. Bullets is too violent. Let's go Wizards. It's like, oh, you were waiting for me to join to do that, huh? I've been a Cardinals fan, St. Louis Cardinals. Shout out to the 13-time World Series champions. Second in Major League Baseball history behind the Yankees. Always a good time going to games at Busch Stadium. I'm a St. Louis City soccer team fan. Before that, I did like Sporting KC, but hometown always takes precedent unless they act like that other team. And then with my hockey too, St. Louis Blues. I mean, I'm not a fan of the Blues as far as like fanatic. You know, I don't keep up with them and as intense like that, but if they're playing, I'm rooting for them. And then again, football, I was left homeless. So I used this criteria and I went through all 32 teams. I had, at the time, this is 2016, so that was 8 years ago. Golly. See these grades coming in? Yeah, there it is right there. Boom. I grab it. Yeah, look at that. Look at that gray right there. It's just, you know, time waits for nobody. It keeps going. It's a very interesting concept. Getting older. 8 years ago, I did this. But yeah, at the time, 2016, the Seahawks were a very good team. So they were at a top seed, I believe. The Pats with Tom Brady were a top seed. I think he had just beaten the Rams in the Super Bowl, or they were getting ready to play the Rams in the Super Bowl. I said their name anyway. I almost said something else. I'm trying to keep this clean. Cowboys, they were still riding high. They had Zeke and they were just getting Dak. Who else? Broncos with Peyton Manning. I had a very interesting, and I'll see if I can post or put a picture of this bracket that I created so artistically designed by myself. I'll put that on the clip of the podcast. But I had all of the teams bracketed. The Cowboys got a bye because they were going up against that team in LA, and I mean there was no need for me to even acknowledge that matchup. Cowboys won, and I just went one by one in that opening round. So I had did I put the Who won? Okay, here we go. Scrolling through the blog here. So the Patriots were up against the Jaguars. I said, that went without saying. I'm not necessarily a fan of I've never been a fan of the Patriots, but I've always admired them, especially once they got Brady. Even going back to the 90s when they had Bledsoe and they went to that Super Bowl. But the Jaguars, I've always liked them as well. The Mark Brunell days and Maurice Jones-Drew, Fred Taylor, Tony Baselli. They had guys, what's the name, John Henderson smacking himself or having the trainer smack him, hit him with smelling salts and all that. They've been an entertaining franchise. They've been a very good franchise in their limited amount of time. But, no, it was no comparison to me. And the Jaguars were basically like the 32nd seed out of 32 teams on my bracket at that time. I think they were just, it wasn't close. So I picked the Patriots. The Bengals were going up against the Texans, which in real life, the Bengals and the Texans have had some really good, memorable matchups in the playoffs and in the regular season throughout the years. Outside of the Ocho Cinco, Carson Palmer era, I really didn't have too much of a connection with the Bengals at that time, 2016. Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and all them, they hadn't hit the scene yet. Whereas I had always had an affinity for the Texans because that was one of the teams I got to see consciously from inception to present day. The Ravens, the Jags, the Panthers, I saw them, but I wasn't like conscious of the beginnings. Like it was kind of like, I've heard about them, but I'm not really paying them attention. I was paying attention to the whole process of bringing the Texans in. So I was a little bit partial to them. I picked the Texans. I had the Colts going up against the Raiders. I picked the Raiders. It just wasn't not the biggest fan of Irsay. And I didn't really like. I just didn't really like Indianapolis. I don't really like that that branding or that culture. It's like a swagless, bland. It's like an unseasoned chicken breast. Can still be good if you cook it right. But then you got this other more flavorful item over here. So I went with the Raiders. I'm just summarizing. So I went through all of these different teams, and on and on and on. I came down to. This will touch on the final. Do the final four. Let's do my final 8. So my final 8 teams were. If I can find it. Did a lot of writing. It was I read through it last night. I'm like, you know what? I'm actually a decent writer. Actually pretty good. So I came down to my final 8, my elite 8 teams. It was Patriots versus Raiders. Ironic. Then I had Steelers versus Titans. 2 franchises I really respect. Eagles and Seahawks. And the Bucks and the Panthers. Now, for those who aren't familiar, just to kind of summate this story, I grew up a Cowboys fan. I did not have a choice. All right? From the time I can remember walking and being conscious of my existence on the earth, the Cowboys were a good team. So, I was born in 89, 1994, 1995. Who was winning Super Bowls? Who was on TV every week? Who were Pat Summerall and John Madden talking about? Who was playing on Thanksgiving? Whose paraphernalia was all over St. Louis? It was the Cowboys. I had a Cowboys lamp with a Cowboys lampshade, and it was a football base with a Cowboys lampshade on it and like a football field themed base that the football was on. And that was one of my favorite lamps throughout my childhood. Had a Cowboys blanket and everything was Cowboys. My dad was a fan of the team. Prior to that, he was a fan of the Steelers. And I've realized in my later years of adulthood that my dad is just a fan of whoever's winning at the time, because now he's a Chiefs fan. But I didn't know that as a child. So I was a Cowboys fan, and it was easy. You're rooting for the team that wins all the time. Doesn't take a lot of effort, a lot of thought. And your friends are on the same bandwagon, so it worked. Got a little older, started to develop my own consciousness, my own thought process, and for whatever reason, early in my childhood, I started to become what I am today, which is anti anything popular. I started to root for whoever everybody else was not rooting for. I started to look for that underdog, and maybe it's just reflective of who I was as an athlete, as a competitor, because I wasn't the biggest, I wasn't the fastest, I wasn't the most athletic. I had to work for everything. I had to earn success and opportunity. And so I saw the Buccaneers rebrand. And I had just started playing Madden like 98, 99. And I started having more access to more of the franchises and seeing who's on the roster and learning more about players. And, Sports Center was starting to become more popular in my space or my awareness. And the Buccaneers were what I gravitated to. Warwick Dunn, Mike Allstott running through people's faces, this little bitty running back complimenting him, and you got a black quarterback in Sean King, which I had been seeing that with the Vikings and other teams, but it was the combination of everything, and the defense being just starting to peak at that time. So started rooting for the Bucs. I wouldn't say I was a fan of them. I started rooting for them. I started liking the Titans too, because they had just moved from Houston, being the Oilers, to Nashville. And I didn't have any awareness at that time of the impact that had in real life on a city, losing a team. It was just like, oh, well, they got new uniforms, and the uniforms are cool. And who is this guy, Eddie George? And they got a black quarterback in Steve McNair. So I started kind of rooting for those teams. And then here comes the team that shall not be named in 1999. Going on the run that they went on as the greatest show on turf. Kurt Warner, Torrey Holt, Isaac Bruce, Marshall Faulk, Orlando Pace, Ricky Prohl, Isaiah Hakeem. I can't name as many defenders. Dre Bly, Kevin Carter. What's his name? Defensive end. Jesus. I should be ashamed. Obviously Mike Jones. They went on their run. And during that run, they beat the Buccaneers in the playoffs. And then they beat the Titans in the Super Bowl. I was rooting for those other teams because those were the teams I grew an affinity for while the Rams sucked, while they were having their bad years with Tony Banks and Lawrence Phillips and all of these other kind of issues. I started to root for these other teams that were playing pretty good. I didn't have the awareness and, again, the connection of like hometown pride and this is your team. And, I didn't have that. I didn't know. It didn't connect for me. So when they started beating the teams that I was rooting for and they won the Super Bowl, I developed a resentment towards them. I was like, and again, as a naturally anti kind of person, it was like, well, F y'all for winning it all. I really don't like y'all now because y'all not only did you beat the teams that I like, but you're getting too much recognition, too much popularity. I've just always been averse to when something gets too popular too quick and too much attention. It's like, I'll wait till it cools off a little bit. So that carried over to the 2001 season, and they obviously played the Patriots in the Super Bowl. Spygate. Again, my young mind, I don't care about all that. I just saw this player have this great run as a backup, getting thrust into the starting lineup because of injury, and leading this team to this Super Bowl championship that I really didn't like anyway because too many people liked them. And that's when I started liking the Patriots. So that didn't endear me to too many people, as you can imagine, in St. Louis. But still liked the Buccaneers at the time, got to enjoy them winning a Super Bowl as a quasi fan. But 2002, along with falling in love with tennis and seeing Serena Williams at the U.S. Open with that catsuit on, I digress. 2002 was also the year that I started to gravitate towards the Eagles. That was the first team I would say I was consciously, decisively a fan of for myself. Donovan McNabb had just gotten to the roster. Andy Reid, big jolly coach to enjoy watching. And I started to learn that roster. Again, playing Madden, you get more access, watching a lot more Sports Center, NFL Live, all that stuff. And I used to know the entire roster in that time frame from top to bottom every year. I knew Hank Fraley, I knew Deuce Staley, I knew Brian Westbrook, I knew Freddie Mitchell, I knew Todd Pinkston, I knew T.O., I knew what's his name? Michael Lewis and Brian Dawkins, and I knew the corners. I knew Jeremiah Trotter, Javon Kirk. I knew the whole roster. And that was the team I was a really big fan of, and it just coincided with them beginning to make trips annually to the NFC Championship game. The reason that I broke off from that fandom was around 2006, 2007. I'm getting ready to graduate from high school, go to college. I started to develop, number one, an affinity for my team because the attention started to wear off. And because I started to be a little bit more, started to travel a little bit more. So I started to develop more of that hometown pride as a St. Louisan. And as a football fan, it made me want to root for my hometown team more. And two, people stopped talking about them as much because they weren't as good. 2005, 2006, 2007. The Greatest Show on Turf era was ending. Kurt Warner had moved on to the Cardinals, or the Giants, and then the Cardinals. We had Mark Bolger. We had Mike Martz. Dick Vermeil had went to the Chiefs. So it was just a completely different vibe. And they weren't good. They weren't as good. You know, they started to trend downwards. Mediocrity all the way into the basement. And then simultaneously, the Eagles were starting to ship players off. Brian Dawkins had gotten cut. I think Jeremiah Trotter got cut or retired. McNabb got traded. T.O., you know, like they were breaking the team up. And I didn't grasp that was part of the NFL life cycle. Guys come in, they play, and they get out, whether they retire or they get cut or traded, usually because they get cut or traded. I just didn't grasp that at that time. Even though I was, a teenager, I still didn't understand the business side of the NFL. I'm like, why are y'all not trying your best to keep these guys together so y'all can win a Super Bowl? Y'all were almost there. Y'all lost the Super Bowl to the Patriots, and it was on the last drive. You're close. You got the guys. Like, just add a couple more guys. Don't break the whole team up. I didn't get that. And so when Brian Dawkins got cut, I was done. I left them alone, and I transitioned fully to that team. So that was when Steven Jackson came on, and then a couple years after that, it was Sam Bradford, and then I used to know that whole roster by heart. Now I'm in college in Arkansas, and all of these people are competitive, and they're wanting to rep their hometown and their city, and I'm repping mine, and we're playing Madden in the dorms and all that stuff. And I said, you know what? As the underdog mentality, I'm going to make this team good. I'm going to learn this team so well that even though they're having the worst stretch of losing seasons in NFL history, I think 5 years they won like 7 games. NFL record in a 5-year stretch. I think only with the Raiders. It's probably the 2 worst stretches of losing in a 5-year span in the past 20, 30 years. Both of those things happened past 20 years. I'm going to make them good. I'm going to learn all of the value and all of the highlights of the team, and I'm going to play Madden against my dorm mates and still beat them and whoop them with this horrible team. And so I developed that sense of pride and connection to the team during that time. And I suffered as a fan through all of those rough years. I went along with every game knowing that we're probably not going to win and still rooting my butt off for them to win for that whole stretch. And throughout my college career, I graduated in 2012, came back to St. Louis. 2014, start hearing the news, start hearing the rumblings. They're getting ready to leave. The owner, who really, I'm really not going to say his name. There's only one other word that comes to mind when I think of that owner, and it's not a good word. So he ends up wanting to move the team. We're having meetings downtown where fans are getting to voice their displeasure, and the NFL is sending people to supposedly listen and, try to grasp what we're thinking and feeling. And they do this whole dog and pony show. And they left. So, here we are with these 8 teams that I named a couple years later. I had already started following the Raiders in like 2014, 2015 on Instagram and social media. I was already naturally gravitating to them. And, to not prolong the story, again, if you want to read up on it more, it's on my blog. But I already liked them, I'd already liked them. I'd played for a team in my hometown, a little league team that was named the Raiders. I already naturally liked black and silver. Those are some of my favorite colors, even though they're neutrals, not really colors. I like the mystique. I like the swag. They have their own song. I like the history of them. I like the owner and Al Davis at the time. Well, Al had just passed recently. And I just liked the direction I felt like they were going. They had just got Derek Carr. He was young. They had just got Khalil Mack. They still had Latavius Murray. They had just got Amari Cooper, who I didn't have any issue with at the time. That came later. I liked where they were going. I liked where they were coming from, and I liked Oakland. I liked the vibe. I liked everything about it. Couldn't have seen what happened in the coming years, but that goes along with my fanhood in general. I get a hold of a team and they just hit the basement. Happened with the team here in St. Louis. Happened when I became a fan of the Wizards. Happened when I became a fan of the Raiders. I become a fan, and Derek Carr decides to break his leg on a playoff run, an MVP caliber season. Here comes John Gruden and all of that. Shout out to Henry Ruggs. Hopefully he's getting the help that he needs, and the families that were affected by that event. That was tragic and very, very frustrating. All of that stuff happens after I become a fan of the Raiders. But it is what it is. I had the Raiders beat the Pats. The Titans ended up beating the Steelers, which I think that was kind of an upset. In hindsight, I probably like the Steelers a little bit more than the Titans, but I really, really like the Titans. I just always liked them. And then their close proximity, Nashville. I like their brief history as the Titans, not including the Houston Oilers era. I had the Panthers beating the Bucks, which was another kind of upset, but I had to go off of a vibe because I kept going back and forth, and the vibe was like I really liked the Panthers. And at that time, Cam Newton was going crazy. He had just come off that MVP year where they went 15-1. And then I liked the Seahawks over the Eagles, which I don't know if it was probably because of how the Seahawks were doing at the time. As I reflect, I would probably say the Eagles over the Seahawks. I like the Eagles a lot more. Just like everything about them. But the Seahawks at that time were Legion of Boom, Richard Sherman, Brandon Browner, Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor. So, and I think, they had Marshawn Lynch, Russell Wilson. They were like at the peak of their powers. So that probably gave them a bump over the Eagles. But as I reflect, I'll probably say Eagles over Seahawks. And then I had the Raiders beat the Titans. I had the Panthers beating the Seahawks, which is fair. Oh, they extended my session. Thank you. And then the Raiders beat the Panthers in the finals. So very enjoyable process. I did the best I could with this bracket and this March Madness style approach of picking my team. I did the best I could to remove emotion and be as objective as I could be with each team and each matchup, what I liked, what I didn't like, who had more positives, who had more negatives, and how they went up against each other. And I came out with the Raiders. That's who I wanted to affiliate myself with. And once I made that decision and I finished the final blog post of this series, I fully committed. I didn't get a jersey yet. I still haven't gotten a jersey 8 years later. Not big on jerseys, but I got a lot of paraphernalia. I got the hats, hoodies, stickers. I just put a bumper sticker on my new car earlier this week, and learn the roster, learn more about the history, and I committed. So that's my squad, and this is a little bit of perspective as to how I approach fanhood and how I approach watching the game, the NFL game. So that's all I got for today. I'm trying to bring this time down more and more, and I have done that. I am right at an hour, coming up on an hour and 1 minute. But next week, I'm going to touch a little bit more on the top 100 list, more training camp development, and we're going to ease our way little by little into the preseason and eventually the regular season 2024, and talk more about what's happening on the field. That's what I'm excited about. What is it that players are doing or not doing that's contributing to team success, that's contributing to roster moves, coaching decisions, front office decisions, so on and so forth. What the film say? If you remember from episode 1, if you watched episode 1. But yeah, if you watched this whole thing, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Be sure, again, to like, comment, subscribe if you find this content interesting, informative, educational, entertaining, what have you, and share it with your friends and your family if you feel like the content is worthwhile. Yeah, I'll be back next week. We're going to keep adding some polish to this thing. We're going to keep making it stronger, better, and more entertaining and informational for you, the fans. I appreciate you. I love you. Hope you have a good weekend, good start to your August. Until next time, peace.